My sister hijacked my wedding date and booked an opulent estate to prove her life mattered more than mine. The night before we were both supposed to say our vows, her venue suffered a catastrophic plumbing failure. Her hundreds of high-net-worth guests scrambled to the only other available hall in the county. They arrived in their designer evening wear, not realizing they were walking straight into my reception. And they certainly did not know they were about to watch her new husband get hauled away in federal handcuffs. I am Chloe, 32 years old, and for my entire life, my family treated my existence as an afterthought. Before I tell you how I turned their betrayal into a statewide scandal, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you love seeing greedy relatives get the exact reality check they deserve. The thick cream-colored envelope tore open with a sharp, crisp sound. I pulled out a heavy card adorned with gold foil lettering. It was a wedding invitation from my younger sister, Harper. My eyes scanned the elegant cursive text and stopped dead on the date. October 12th. It was the exact same Saturday I had secured for my own wedding, a date I had printed on save-the-date cards and mailed to our entire extended family 6 months ago. I did not have time to process the audacity of the card before my phone buzzed on the kitchen island. The caller ID displayed my mother, Brenda. I answered, expecting a frantic apology or an explanation of some clerical error at the printing press. Instead, her voice came through the speaker, sharp and demanding. "Chloe," she said, skipping any form of greeting, "you need to call your vendors and push your date back to next spring." Harper and Chad just finalized their venue. I stood holding the phone, looking across the room at my fiancé, Julian. He was sitting at our dining table, sorting through a stack of corporate real estate portfolios. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my tone level. "I booked my venue a year ago. Family members have already booked flights." Brenda sighed, the sound carrying a heavy layer of manufactured exhaustion. "Be reasonable, Chloe. Chad just signed a contract for the largest private estate in Westchester. He is flying in top-tier crypto investors and venture capitalists. He needs this wedding to be a networking event for his new tech fund. You cannot expect our relatives to choose between the event of the decade and your quiet little dinner party. It would be embarrassing for you to have an empty room." In the background of the call, I heard a distinct muffled laugh. It was Harper. She was sitting right next to our mother, relishing the moment. They expected me to argue. They waited for my voice to crack for me to plead for fairness or throw a tantrum they could later use to paint me as the jealous older sister. I looked back at Julian. He was not looking at his real estate portfolios anymore. He was staring at a secondary laptop screen alongside his sister Zoe. Zoe is a fierce African-American corporate litigator who handles financial compliance on Wall Street. She had stopped by for coffee, but her attention was now consumed by a digital ledger she had just pulled up on the screen. Zoe caught my eye. She pointed at a glaring red discrepancy in the financial filings attached to Chad and his supposedly booming cryptocurrency fund. A slow, chilling smile touched the corners of Zoe's mouth. I held the phone back to my ear. I did not shed a tear over my mother's demand. I did not fight for my wedding date. "I am not changing my date, Mom," I replied, my voice smooth and devoid of emotional weight. "We will just have to see who shows up." I hung up the phone before Brenda could launch into another lecture. Harper and Chad wanted a war over a spot on the calendar. They thought they were outsmarting a mid-level event planner. They had no idea I was a senior director of hospitality acquisitions, managing a 9-figure investment fund. And thanks to the glaring numbers glowing on Zoe's laptop screen, I knew Chad was not a tech genius. I was a walking financial crime, and I was going to let him dig his own grave. Less than 24 hours after my mother demanded I surrender my wedding date, the digital barrage began. I was sitting at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee when my phone illuminated with a steady stream of incoming emails. The first notification was from the boutique floral design studio I had contracted 11 months ago. The second message arrived barely 2 minutes later from the executive chef of the elite catering company I had secured for the reception. Both emails read like highly sterilized corporate scripts. They cited unexpected scheduling conflicts and unforeseen logistical errors as the reasons for terminating their services. They offered profound apologies and promised to refund my initial deposits by the end of the business week. To an ordinary bride, losing the two most critical vendors mere months before the ceremony would induce an immediate panic attack. Tears would fall, frantic phone calls would be made, and a desperate scramble for replacements would begin. But I did not shed a single tear. I did not experience a spike in my heart rate. I simply set my coffee mug down on the granite counter and stared at the glowing screen. In the high-stakes hospitality sector, premier vendors do not breach ironclad service contracts unless the financial incentive to walk away heavily outweighs the steep legal penalties involved. Someone had bought them out. I picked up my phone and bypassed the generic customer service number, dialing the executive chef on his direct personal line. He answered on the third ring, his voice tight with obvious discomfort. He tried to reiterate the vague excuses from his email, stammering through a rehearsed apology about supply chain issues and staffing shortages. I let him speak for a few seconds before cutting through the noise. I did not raise my voice or resort to angry accusations. I simply reminded him of my actual profession. As a senior director of hospitality acquisitions, I manage the commercial real estate portfolios for several prominent restaurant groups across the East Coast. I reminded the chef that my investment fund held the master lease for the exact building where his primary commercial kitchen operated. The line went dead silent. The power dynamic shifted instantly. He was no longer dealing with a frustrated bride. He was speaking to the executive who controlled his overhead costs. The chef abandoned the corporate script and offered the raw truth. He admitted that a representative acting on behalf of Chad had contacted his office late last night. The representative offered to pay triple my contracted rate, provided entirely upfront in a lump sum cash wire to secure his catering team for a lavish estate wedding in Westchester on October 12th. The floral designer had received the exact same predatory offer. Harper had not just hijacked my calendar date. She was systematically stripping my event down to the studs, deploying Chad's supposedly limitless cryptocurrency wealth to ensure I had no food, no flowers, and no dignity left. She wanted me to scramble. She wanted me to feel small. My phone vibrated against the marble counter before I even ended the call with the chef. The caller ID displayed my father, Gregory. I swiped the screen to answer, holding the device to my ear while looking out the window at the morning traffic. "Chloe, I assume you have checked your email by now," Gregory said. His tone lacked any trace of paternal warmth or sympathy. It carried the smug satisfaction of a man observing a highly predictable outcome. "Your mother mentioned you were being stubborn about the calendar last night. I warned her you would need a harsh dose of reality to understand the situation. You consider stealing my caterer a necessary dose of reality?" "Dad," I asked, keeping my tone level and inquisitive. Gregory chuckled, a dry sound that echoed through the speaker. "It is just basic business economics, Chloe. Chad has significant capital flowing through his new technology fund. He requires elite services to entertain his investors and business partners. You are planning a modest gathering on a limited budget. You simply lack the financial capacity to rival him in the open market." The vendors made a logical choice. He paused, letting his condescension settle over the conversation. "Let this go. Cancel your remaining venue deposits, buy a nice dress, and support your sister as a bridesmaid. It is the only graceful exit you have left. Do not humiliate yourself by trying to compete with real wealth." He spoke to me as if I were a naive teenager, failing a basic arithmetic class. My father had spent his entire life viewing me as a mediocre event planner, entirely blind to the fact that I controlled investment portfolios worth more than his entire retirement savings. He worshipped the flashy, unearned money Chad paraded around the country club, equating loud spending with actual success. I did not defend my bank accounts. I did not mention the commercial leases I held. I simply absorbed his arrogance. "Enjoy the estate, Dad," I replied, ending the call with a smooth tap of my finger. I walked out of the kitchen and handed my tablet directly to Zoe. My fiancé Julian was leaning against the doorframe watching his sister work. Zoe wore a sharp-tailored suit, preparing for her morning meetings. As a highly successful African-American litigator working for a top-tier Wall Street law firm, she specialized in corporate compliance and financial fraud. When I showed her the emails and relayed the caterer's confession about the triple buyout, Zoe did not offer sympathetic hugs or expressions of pity. She cracked her knuckles, a fierce predatory gleam lighting up her dark eyes, and opened a secure terminal on her laptop. If Chad paid triple the rate up front, he left a digital footprint. Zoe noted her fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. Vendors of that caliber do not accept suitcases of physical cash. They require traceable wire transfers for their tax records. I used my hospitality network to pull the routing receipt from the caterer's holding account. I forwarded the transaction data to Zoe's secure email. I watched her scan the incoming numbers. Her expression shifted from mild curiosity to intense forensic focus. She accessed a proprietary legal database tracing the origin point of the wire transfer Chad had used to bribe my vendors. The silence in the room stretched for 40 agonizing minutes. Zoe cross-referenced the routing numbers against public securities filings and corporate registries. Julian stepped closer, recognizing the serious shift in his sister's demeanor. He knows exactly how she operates when she uncovers a fatal flaw in an opposing counsel's case. "He is remarkably sloppy," Zoe finally said, breaking the silence. She turned her laptop so Julian and I could view the illuminated screen. "Your future brother-in-law is playing a very dangerous game." She pointed a manicured finger at a highlighted row of banking data. This wire transfer did not originate from Chad's personal checking account. It did not come from a legitimate business operating fund. Chad wired the bribe money directly out of a fiduciary trust account registered to his cryptocurrency investment firm. I leaned closer, my acquisitions instincts kicking into high gear. "He used investor capital to pay for wedding flowers," I asked, clarifying the data on the screen. "He commingled the assets," Zoe confirmed, a sharp edge entering her voice. "He is taking money specifically earmarked for technology investments and funneling it directly into personal luxury expenditures. That is a blatant violation of federal securities law. It constitutes textbook wire fraud and embezzlement." The implications settled over the room like a heavy storm cloud. Harper thought she was playing a petty game of sibling rivalry. She thought she was winning a superficial competition over floral arrangements and expensive appetizers. She had no idea that her fiancé was financing her dream wedding by actively defrauding high-net-worth investors. If he is pulling funds this recklessly to pay off a local wedding vendor. Julian observed his tone, analytical and cold. The entire crypto fund is likely a fragile house of cards. He needs this extravagant wedding to project an image of extreme wealth. He is using the estate and the luxury catering as a prop to lure in new investors before his initial capital runs out. I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen. The petty family drama had just evaporated, replaced by something far more sinister. My sister and my father wanted to humiliate me using Chad's artificial wealth. They believed his fake empire gave them the right to dictate my life and push me into the shadows. They were proudly standing on top of a crumbling financial scheme, mocking my existence while holding a lit match. I looked at Zoe and Julian. We were not going to call the local police. We were not going to warn my parents about the impending disaster. We were going to let Chad build his glass castle as high as possible. We would let Harper invite every wealthy elite in the state to witness her triumph, and then we would systematically shatter every single pane of glass. Before I could formulate our next strategic move, my phone buzzed again with a high-priority email alert. It was a notification from the estate lawyer who managed my late grandmother's accounts. The subject line indicated an immediate hold on my personal trust fund disbursements. My parents were making their next move, attempting to initiate a financial chokehold to force my compliance. They had no idea they were simply handing me the exact tools I needed to orchestrate their ultimate ruin. The email from the estate attorney glowed stark white against the dark monitor on my desk. My grandmother had established a modest trust fund prior to her passing, structured to disburse $100,000 upon my 32nd birthday. It was designed to be a quiet safety net, a final gesture of care. Before I could draft a standard reply to the attorney, the direct line on my desk chimed. The caller ID displayed my father, Gregory. He had bypassed my personal cell phone, choosing to call my workplace during business hours to ensure I felt exposed and cornered. I tapped the speaker button, leaning back into my ergonomic leather chair. Gregory did not offer a polite greeting. His voice carried the familiar patronizing cadence he always used when dictating terms to his children. He informed me that as the primary executor of the estate, he had enacted an emergency suspension on my disbursement. The funds were locked. He then twisted the blade, declaring that the money would be temporarily reallocated to cover the costs of Harper's custom bridal gown. When you learn how to bow down and respect the hierarchy of this family, we might reconsider reopening the account," Gregory dictated, his tone dripping with unearned authority. "Until then, your sister needs the capital to ensure her investors are properly entertained. You forced our hand by refusing to surrender your wedding date. Consider this a lesson in consequences." I looked out through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Manhattan corner office. Far below, the financial district moved in a relentless blur of yellow cabs and hurried executives. Gregory genuinely believed I was sitting in a cramped, windowless cubicle, earning a meager hourly wage, coordinating birthday parties and corporate luncheons. For decades, I allowed my family to maintain this delusion. It kept their greed directed elsewhere. They remained entirely oblivious to the fact that I served as the senior director of hospitality acquisitions for a premier private equity firm. I controlled a commercial real estate portfolio valued at $150 million. I spent my mornings restructuring failing hotel chains and my afternoons executing hostile takeovers of luxury resorts. To Gregory, withholding $100,000 was a crippling financial chokehold. To me, it was the equivalent of losing a spare coin in the cushions of a sofa. I did not argue. I did not beg my father to release my grandmother's inheritance. I let the silence stretch over the speakerphone, allowing him to marinate in his false sense of victory. I simply told him to enjoy the dress fitting and ended the connection. The moment the line clicked dead, the brief shadow of familial disappointment vanished, replaced by cold surgical focus. I summoned my lead investment strategist, Marcus. He walked into my office a few minutes later, carrying a tablet loaded with real estate analytics. I handed him the address of the sprawling Westchester estate Chad had so proudly secured for his fake cryptocurrency gala. The property was renowned for its historical architecture and expansive manicured gardens, but external beauty often masks deep structural rot. I instructed Marcus to run a forensic sweep on the estate's parent management company. I wanted to see their quarterly earnings, their outstanding liabilities, and their commercial credit rating. It took Marcus less than 2 hours to return with a comprehensive financial breakdown. The management group overseeing the Westchester property was drowning in toxic debt. They had over-leveraged their assets to survive a recent economic downturn, taking on high-interest commercial loans they could no longer service. They were bleeding cash, teetering on the very edge of insolvency. Chad had likely secured the venue by offering a flashy upfront cash bribe, which the desperate management firm accepted just to keep their creditors at bay for another month. They were vulnerable, desperate, and entirely exposed. I did not just want to cancel Harper's venue reservation. Canceling a contract was petty amateur warfare. I wanted undeniable ironclad jurisdiction over the very ground she planned to walk on. I authorized Marcus to initiate a quiet, aggressive buyout of the management company's distressed commercial debt. We operated through a network of opaque holding entities, ensuring my name never appeared on a single legal ledger. By purchasing their bad loans at a steep discount, my investment fund became the primary lien holder of the entire estate. I held the mortgage. I controlled the property rights. I was, for all legal intents and purposes, the new landlord of my sister's dream wedding venue. The beauty of this corporate maneuver was its flawless silence. I instructed the property management firm to proceed with business as usual. They were ordered to accept Chad's deposits, confirm Harper's catering schedules, and guarantee their booking without raising a single red flag. I wanted them to feel secure. I wanted Harper to try on her stolen designer gown and envision her grand entrance down the marble staircase. I wanted Chad to promise his elite cryptocurrency investors a night of unparalleled luxury. They were building their fragile house of cards on a foundation I now legally owned. The financial strike was executed flawlessly before the stock market closed for the day. My parents thought they had punished me, stripping away my safety net to fund my sister's vanity project. They had no idea they had just funded the rope for their own execution. While I solidified my grip on the physical venue, the lack of retaliation on my end provoked a different kind of desperation in my sister. Harper expected a war. She anticipated a screaming match, a tearful phone call, or a dramatic family showdown where she could play the victorious queen. When I offered nothing but radio silence, her narcissistic need for validation drove her to escalate the conflict. If she could not break me in private, she would attempt to destroy my reputation in front of the entire world. My desk phone chimed with a message from Zoe. The text contained no words, only a single link redirecting to a popular social media platform. The war was moving from the boardroom to the digital stage, and Harper was about to hand us the very evidence we needed to lock her fiancé in a federal prison cell. I clicked the secure link Zoe provided and leaned back in my chair. The screen of my phone illuminated, displaying a high-definition video Harper had posted across all her social media channels. She sat on the edge of her plush velvet sofa, wearing no makeup, her hair tied back in a deliberately messy knot. She stared into the camera lens with wide, tear-filled eyes. It was a masterclass in manufactured vulnerability. Harper had spent her entire life studying how to manipulate an audience, and she was putting on the performance of her career. She began a lengthy monologue about the hidden struggles of mental health and the devastating toll of toxic family dynamics. Her voice trembled at all the right intervals. She claimed I was holding our parents hostage, demanding they finance a dull, uninspired wedding, while I selfishly refused to contribute a single dollar. She painted a picture of a jealous, bitter older sister who could not stand to see her sibling find true love. She called me a parasite, draining the family resources. She wiped a single, perfectly timed tear from her cheek, telling her thousands of followers that I was trying to sabotage the happiest day of her life out of pure spite. I scrolled down to the comments section. It was a predictable feeding frenzy. Relatives I had known since childhood, aunts and cousins who had eaten at my dinner table, eagerly rallied to her defense. Aunt Carol typed a long paragraph calling me a bitter spinster who could not handle my younger sister marrying a wealthy entrepreneur. Cousin David told me to grow up and stop extorting our parents. They swallowed the performance without a single question. I watched the engagement numbers climb rapidly. 50,000 views, 100,000 views. The narrative was set, and I was officially the villain of the family. Julian walked into our home office carrying 2 cups of fresh espresso. He set the cups down on my desk and glanced at the monitor. He watched the video play, his jaw tightening with every lie Harper delivered. Julian is a man who values integrity above all else. He operates a highly successful architectural firm and possesses zero tolerance for public defamation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, ready to dial his legal team. He wanted to file a formal cease and desist order. He wanted to hit Harper with a slander lawsuit before the video reached another 100,000 people. I reached across the desk and placed my hand gently over his. I shook my head, keeping my expression perfectly calm. A defamation suit would only give her the drawn-out legal battle she craved. It would provide her with a larger stage to play the victim and drag out the drama for months. I did not want a prolonged court case over hurt feelings. I wanted a swift, decisive execution. I told Julian to look closer at the video feed. I rewound the footage to the 2-minute mark. Harper, having finished her crying routine, transitioned seamlessly into a promotional pitch. She wiped her eyes, forced a brave smile, and held up a glossy, gold-trimmed brochure. She told her followers that instead of traditional wedding gifts, she and Chad were accepting early investments into his new decentralized finance protocol. She claimed it was an exclusive, limited-time opportunity to build generational wealth alongside them. She held the brochure close to the camera lens, asking her audience to scan the printed code or look up the registered corporate entity. She proudly read the state registration number of Chad's holding company, aloud boasting about his financial genius. She thought she was flaunting her elite status. She had actually just handed us the exact key we needed to unlock the vault. I did not waste time getting angry over the petty insults. I typed the corporate registration number into a secure message and sent it directly to Zoe. My future sister-in-law operates at the highest echelons of corporate litigation. She spends her days dismantling fraudulent hedge funds and auditing rogue brokers on Wall Street. A regional cryptocurrency operation was child's play for a woman with her forensic capabilities. I asked Zoe to run a deep, unvarnished audit on the entity Harper had just broadcast to the world. Julian and I drank our espresso in quiet anticipation. We did not have to wait long. Less than an hour later, Zoe initiated a secure video call. She sat in her sleek Manhattan office, the skyline towering behind her. Her expression was devoid of any humor. She projected a series of complex financial flowcharts onto our shared screen. The lines of data told a horrifying, undeniable story. Zoe bypassed the superficial tax filings and dug straight into the transactional ledgers. Chad did not own a decentralized finance protocol. He did not employ a blockchain development team or hold any proprietary software patents. The holding company possessed zero underlying assets. It was a classic textbook Ponzi scheme. The money flowing into the corporate accounts from eager new investors was being used directly to pay off the initial seed funders, creating a false, highly dangerous illusion of high-yield returns. The remainder of the capital, the vast majority of the funds, was being siphoned into a private offshore trust. That trust was the financial engine funding Chad's leased luxury cars, his designer suits, and the staggering cash deposits required for Harper's opulent estate wedding. He was literally stealing from his guests to pay for the party. The fraud was severe, and it carried a mandatory federal prison sentence. But Zoe was not finished. Her eyes narrowed as she zoomed in on a specific series of incoming wire transfers displayed on the screen. She had tracked the origin of the largest capital injection the fund received in the last fiscal quarter. The routing numbers pointed to a local domestic bank. The account holder was not an anonymous venture capitalist or a wealthy tech entrepreneur. The name on the origin account belonged to Gregory and Brenda. I stared at the screen, analyzing the dates of the transfer. My parents had not just emptied their savings accounts to appease my sister. Zoe pulled up the county property registry. They had visited a commercial lender and signed a secondary mortgage agreement. They leveraged the entire equity of their primary residence, the house I grew up in, and handed the massive cash payout directly to Chad. They believed they were securing a guaranteed return on investment. They thought they were buying their way into the elite upper class, securing a future of effortless wealth. Instead, they had handed the deed to their home to a con artist who was currently using their retirement money to buy ice sculptures and crystal champagne flutes for a fake wedding. They were funding their own financial slaughter. The irony was chilling. They froze my modest trust fund to punish me for maintaining my boundaries. They called me a parasite and publicly shamed me on social media. Meanwhile, their beloved golden child and her brilliant fiancé were actively bleeding them dry. If the scheme collapsed today, the bank would foreclose on their property by the end of the month. They would be left with nothing but the clothes in their closets. Harper wanted to show the world she was winning. She wanted to prove her fiancé was a titan of industry. She had just provided the federal government with a recorded confession of securities fraud. Julian leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk. He looked at the undeniable evidence of wire fraud and grand larceny. He asked Zoe if we should contact the federal authorities right now and hand over the audit. I shook my head, my mind mapping out the logistical battlefield. If we tipped off the authorities today, Chad would recognize the incoming freeze. He monitored those accounts daily. The moment the banks locked the funds, he would drain whatever cash remained in the offshore trusts, pack a single bag, and vanish across international borders before the police even drafted a search warrant. My parents would be left homeless, facing foreclosure and potential complicity charges. We could not let him run. We needed to trap him in a room he could not escape. We needed to ensure he felt invincible right up until the exact second the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Chad had just invited hundreds of his wealthiest investors to a single location to celebrate his false empire. We just needed to control the stage where the final act would play out. And thanks to my recent real estate acquisition, I owned the very ground he planned to stand on. The morning after Harper posted her tearful video, the heavy glass doors of my office swung open. Zoe strode in, bypassing my assistant entirely. She did not carry her usual sleek briefcase. She held a thick, expanding file folder secured with a heavy rubber band. She dropped it directly onto the center of my desk. The impact sounded like a judge striking a wooden gavel. She slid a stack of documents out of the folder and spread them across the glass surface. The top page bore the undeniable and intimidating seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. A bright red stamp reading "Pending Review" marked the upper right corner. Zoe leaned over the desk, her dark eyes locking onto mine. I pulled a few favors from my former colleagues in the regulatory division. Zoe stated, her voice a low, steady hum. Chad is not just operating in the gray area of decentralized finance. He is running a textbook classical Ponzi scheme, and he is doing it with astonishing arrogance. I picked up the first spreadsheet. The columns dictated the cash flow of his primary holding entity. The mechanics of his fraud were laid out in stark, undeniable black and white. He was soliciting heavy capital from new eager investors, promising them a guaranteed 20% quarterly return. Instead of placing that capital into legitimate tech startups or blockchain development, he was using the fresh cash to pay the expected dividends to his earliest backers. This created a highly contagious illusion of stability. The early investors, thrilled with their returns, brought in their wealthy friends. The pool grew, but the core of the fund was a rotting void. I traced the outgoing wire transfers. Chad was siphoning off 60% of the principal investments into a labyrinth of offshore personal accounts. The ledger read like a shopping list for a careless aristocrat. There was a $45,000 charge for a custom luxury watch, a $90,000 outgoing wire to a diamond broker in Antwerp, which precisely matched the description of the 6-carat engagement ring Harper parroted around on social media. And most glaringly, a $200,000 transfer marked as an earnest money deposit for the Westchester estate. He was building a kingdom out of thin air, using stolen retirement funds to buy champagne and designer gowns. Julian walked into the office carrying our morning coffee. He set the cups down and looked over my shoulder at the government documents. He traced the list of defrauded investors, his jaw tightening as he recognized several prominent names from the city real estate development boards. "Look at this specific cluster of names," Julian pointed out, tapping a manicured finger against the second page. "These are not retail investors. These are institutional whales. Why is he targeting them now?" A financial scam usually relies on a broad base of smaller targets to avoid triggering high-level audits. Zoe pulled a secondary document from the folder. It was a printed copy of Harper's official wedding guest list extracted from their digital response portal. She placed it side by side with the investor target list. The overlap was nearly identical. The realization hit the room like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. The October 12th event was not a celebration of love. It was not a union of two families. The extravagant floral arrangements, the string quartets, and the historic Westchester estate were all carefully curated props for a high-pressure sales floor. Chad needed the wedding to project an aura of limitless prosperity. He planned to gather the wealthiest, most influential figures on the East Coast into a single opulent room. While they drank premium vintage wine and marveled at the sheer scale of the event, he would subtly pitch his cryptocurrency protocol. He intended to use the facade of a lavish, successful life to lure them into writing 7-figure checks before the dessert course was served. He needed their fresh capital to keep his fraudulent pyramid from collapsing before the end of the fiscal year. Harper was not a bride, she was the glamorous bait, and my parents, who had mortgaged the house I grew up in to fund this charade, were nothing more than unwitting accomplices, providing the illusion of respectable family backing. "We have everything we need," Zoe said, her tone sharp and decisive. "I can submit this entire dossier to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network today. The Bureau will have agents at his office by tomorrow morning. They will freeze the domestic accounts and issue an immediate warrant for his arrest." I stared at the red stamp on the paperwork. The urge to end the charade was a powerful magnetic pull. I could make one phone call and watch my sister's fake empire crumble before she even had her final dress fitting. I could stop the smear campaign and force my parents to face the catastrophic reality of their golden child's choices. But Julian placed a firm hand on my shoulder. His analytical mind, trained to foresee structural failures in towering skyscrapers, was already calculating the fallout. If Zoe submits that file today, Chad walks away. Julian stated, his gaze fixed on the offshore routing numbers. "Look at his contingency protocols. He holds dual citizenship and maintains liquid assets in jurisdictions without extradition treaties. He possesses automated tracking software on those holding accounts. The very second a federal freeze touches his domestic portfolio, he will receive an alert." Julian outlined the grim reality of pursuing immediate justice. Chad would not wait around to explain himself to federal agents. He would pack a single bag, leave Harper standing in her designer shoes, and charter a private flight out of the regional airport within a 3-hour window. He would vanish, taking the remaining millions with him. "And what happens to your parents?" Julian asked, his voice low. "They leveraged their primary residence to invest in a ghost. If Chad flees the bank, forecloses on their house by November, they will be destitute. Harper will play the naive, heartbroken victim, claiming she knew nothing about the finances, and the true victims will never see a single dime of their money. The sterile air of my corner office grew heavy with the weight of that truth. Bringing the law down on them right now would only grant the primary villain a head start. It would leave the innocent investors bankrupt and allow my toxic family to spin a narrative of shared tragedy rather than facing accountability for their own greed. I looked up at Julian. We did not need to exchange words. The shared understanding flowed between us, cold and resolute. We were not going to trigger the alarms. We were not going to issue warnings. We let them have the wedding, I said. Zoe raised an eyebrow, a slow, predatory smirk forming on her lips. She understood the assignment. We let Harper put on the dress she bought with stolen money. I continued, my voice taking on a chilling, rhythmic cadence. We let my father walk her down the aisle, puffing his chest out with unearned pride. We let Chad stand at the altar, looking out at a sea of wealthy targets, believing he is the smartest man in the room. We let them climb to the highest peak of their arrogant delusion, because a fall from the ground floor only causes bruises. A fall from the penthouse shatters every bone in the body. We needed them surrounded by the very people they intended to defraud. We needed the venture capitalists and the elite society members to witness the execution firsthand, ensuring Chad could never con another investor, and Harper could never show her face in high society again. But to execute a trap of that magnitude, we could not leave the environment to chance. We needed to orchestrate the exact moment the ground vanished beneath their feet. We needed total, undisputed control of the theater where this tragedy would unfold. My eyes drifted away from the government documents and landed on the commercial real estate portfolio resting on the edge of my desk. The portfolio containing the distressed debt of the Westchester estate. I had purchased their mortgage to secure a quiet financial hold. Now I realized the building itself was the ultimate weapon. I picked up my desk phone, ready to summon my acquisitions team. It was time to stop acting like a mere investor and start acting like the landlord. I picked up the receiver of my desk phone. The Westchester estate was a beautiful architectural facade hiding a decaying infrastructure. The management group, Heritage Properties, had ignored municipal safety citations for half a decade to keep their profit margins afloat. Their negligence was my entry point. I dialed my primary commercial broker. I told him to draft a buyout offer for a controlling stake in Heritage Properties. I set the purchase price exactly 5% above their current outstanding liabilities. It was a lifeline a bankrupt board of directors could not refuse. My second call went to our internal compliance director. I instructed him to expedite the due diligence process. We bypassed standard physical inspections because I already knew the building was rotting from the inside out. The third call was to Julian. He authorized the release of funds from our joint venture capital reserve. A 9-figure wire transfer cleared the Federal Reserve network before lunchtime. By 2 p.m, the transaction was legally binding. I did not purchase the estate under my own name. That would trigger an alert on Chad's tracking software. The deed transferred directly into a Delaware-based blind trust named Vanguard Hospitality. I sat in my office holding the finalized digital contract. I was officially the owner of the very ground Harper planned to stand on. She was renting a fantasy, and I owned the reality. The power dynamic shifted invisibly. Chad thought his stolen cryptocurrency afforded him elite status. He was merely a temporary tenant in my portfolio. The next morning, I summoned the lead operations manager of the Westchester estate to my Manhattan office. He arrived sweating, wiping his forehead with a wrinkled handkerchief. He expected a newly minted corporate overlord to liquidate his position and terminate his staff. He sat rigidly in the leather guest chair, holding a stack of current event contracts, waiting for the axe to fall. I poured him a cup of coffee and handed him the active events ledger. I pointed to the October 12 booking listed under Chad's name. The manager immediately started apologizing. He assumed I wanted the calendar cleared for impending structural renovations. He promised he could cancel the wedding and refund their deposit by the end of the day. I raised a hand, stopping his panicked rambling. I told him the event would proceed exactly as contracted. He exhaled a long breath of relief, but I was not finished. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a thick file of neglected municipal citations extracted from the estate's public records. The building featured original cast-iron plumbing installed nearly a century ago. The city had ordered a mandatory high-pressure safety test of the main water lines 3 years prior. The previous owners paid hefty fines to delay the inspection because they knew the ancient pipes could not withstand modern regulatory stress. I slid the citations across the glass desk. I informed the manager that Vanguard Hospitality operated under strict legal compliance. I ordered him to schedule the municipal pressure test immediately. He stared at the paperwork, his face paling. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the desk. He warned me that running full municipal pressure through those old pipes would likely cause a catastrophic rupture within the walls. He said a failure of that magnitude would flood the entire grand ballroom. I maintained steady eye contact. I told him to schedule the test for Friday night, October 11th, exactly 12 hours before the wedding guests were set to arrive. If the pipes held, the wedding would proceed without interruption. If they failed, the city would condemn the building, and the management company would face zero liability for following local ordinances. The manager nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken directive. He gathered his folders and left my office to make the call to the city inspectors. While the municipal paperwork processed through City Hall, Harper continued her digital performance. My phone updated with her latest social media posts. She stood inside an exclusive bridal boutique wearing a custom silk gown heavily embellished with imported pearls. The caption boasted about the exorbitant cost, tagging the Westchester venue and reminding her followers to prepare for the event of the season. She twirled for the camera, smiling a brilliant artificial smile. She layered her posts with hashtags related to Chad's cryptocurrency fund, actively baiting more investors into the snare. She was dancing, spinning, and celebrating her perceived victory over me. She had no idea she was dancing in the palm of my hand. She thought she had stolen my joy. She did not realize I had bought her entire stage. The venue trap was securely armed and ticking down to the final hours. The city inspectors were booked, the pipes were waiting to burst, but a silent victory was insufficient for the scale of their betrayal. Chad and Harper needed to feel their false power reach its zenith before the floor collapsed. They had spent weeks trying to intimidate me from afar, using social media and flying monkeys to wage a proxy war. I needed them to bring that hostility directly to my face. The perfect opportunity loomed on the calendar. Julian and I had scheduled a small private rehearsal dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown for the evening of October 11th. It was an intimate gathering meant only for our trusted circle of friends and reliable vendors. But toxic people cannot resist an audience. They treat quiet happiness as a personal insult. My parents had made it clear they intended to force my submission before the wedding weekend commenced. They wanted me to bow down and surrender the photographer I had booked a year in advance. They were gathering their forces, preparing to ambush my private dinner, unaware that they were marching straight into a minefield of federal evidence. The evening of October 11 arrived with a crisp autumn chill. Julian and I hosted our rehearsal dinner in the private wine cellar of a secluded downtown restaurant. The atmosphere was deliberately intimate. Soft candlelight reflected off the exposed brick walls, and a jazz trio played quietly in the corner. We surrounded ourselves only with our most trusted friends and key vendors. Zoe sat across from me, her phone resting face down on the table. The legal machinery she had set into motion was silently running its course in the background. We were simply enjoying a rare moment of peace before the impending storm. That peace shattered when the heavy oak doors of the private dining room swung open. The maitre d' stepped back, looking flustered, as 4 unwelcome figures pushed past him. My father Gregory marched into the room first, his jaw set in a rigid line. My mother Brenda followed closely behind, wearing a strained expression of maternal disapproval. Then came Harper, clinging tightly to Chad's arm. Chad wore a custom tuxedo that strained at the shoulders, an expensive silk pocket square tucked into his chest. He surveyed the quiet, refined room with a look of blatant boredom, clearly unimpressed by an event that did not feature ice sculptures and hundreds of sycophants. They did not walk in to offer congratulations. They did not come to share a toast on the eve of my wedding. They moved like a coordinated hunting party closing in on a target. The jazz trio stopped playing. Conversations around the long mahogany table faded into a tense, heavy silence. Julian set his glass of scotch down. He did not stand up or raise his voice. He simply watched them with the cold, analytical gaze of a man accustomed to structural failures. Harper did not waste time with pleasantries. She stepped around our father and marched directly to my seat at the head of the table. Her eyes darted toward the corner of the room where my lead photographer was packing up his equipment after capturing the evening's candid moments. "I want your media team," Harper demanded, pointing a manicured finger at the photographer. I looked up at her, keeping my posture relaxed against the leather chair. I had booked a renowned international photojournalist, a man who shot editorial covers in Paris and Milan. Securing his contract took a year of meticulous planning and a substantial deposit. "Her photographer is too elite for this tiny basement dinner," Harper whined, pivoting to look at Chad. She stomped her designer heel against the stone floor. "My guest list is filled with high-net-worth individuals. We need a premier media team to capture the networking event for your fund. We cannot use the local vendor Mom booked. They do not know how to shoot VIP investors. You have to give him to me, Chloe. My wedding actually matters to the financial sector." Chad stepped forward, adopting the posture of a benevolent king solving a minor peasant dispute. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a leather checkbook. "Listen," Chloe, Chad said, his tone dripping with unearned superiority. "We both know you stretched your budget to hire this guy. It was a bad financial calculation on your part. I will write you a check right now to reimburse your deposit, plus an extra 10% for your trouble. Just sign the contract over to Harper. She needs the aesthetic for her social media rollout tomorrow." He clicked his gold pen, ready to write a fraudulent check drawn from the very accounts Zoe had already flagged for federal investigation. I was trying to buy my vendor using stolen investor capital. I did not reach for the check. I picked up my crystal glass of red wine and took a slow, measured sip. The rich, dark flavor contrasted sharply with the erratic energy radiating from the four people standing over me. My silence ignited my father's temper. Gregory slammed his open palm flat against the mahogany table. The silverware rattled. Several of my guests shifted uncomfortably, but Zoe just leaned back, watching the spectacle with clinical detachment. "You will surrender the photography contract tonight," Gregory ordered, his voice echoing off the brick walls. "Your sister has prominent venture capitalists flying in tomorrow morning. Chad is on the verge of closing a massive syndication deal. This is not just a party, it is a critical business operation. You are jeopardizing your family's future because of your petty jealousy." Brenda stepped up beside him, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "Do not force us to take drastic measures, Chloe. We already froze your grandmother's trust fund. If you refuse to cooperate and support your sister right now, your father and I will officially disown you. We will not attend your ceremony tomorrow. You will be entirely cut off from this family." The ultimatum hung in the cool cellar air. They were threatening to sever our blood ties over a camera crew. They believed the threat of disownment was their ultimate weapon, the final lever that would force my submission. They expected me to crumble to cry, to frantically sign over my contracts just to keep them in my life. They did not realize I had mentally severed those ties months ago. I placed my wine glass back onto the table. The base clicked softly against the wood. I looked at Gregory. I looked at Brenda. Then I turned my gaze to my sister and the man standing beside her, funding his fake empire with stolen money. I reached down to my side and picked up my structured leather handbag. I opened the brass clasp and withdrew a thick sealed envelope. The paper was heavy, unmarked, and pristine. I held it between my fingers for a brief moment, feeling the weight of the document resting inside. I did not raise my voice. I did not match their frantic, aggressive energy. I kept my tone smooth and chillingly polite. "I am not reassigning my photography team," I stated, my eyes locking onto Harper. "But I did not forget about your big day." I placed the sealed envelope onto the polished mahogany table and slid it gently across the surface. It glided smoothly, coming to a stop directly in front of Harper's hands. "Here is your early wedding gift," I said. My voice dropped to a quiet, razor-sharp whisper. "I want you to take this back to your hotel suite. Do not open it tonight. Keep the seal intact. I want you to open it exactly tomorrow morning, right before you put on your dress. It will change the entire trajectory of your future." Harper stared at the envelope. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion, but her inherent greed won out. She snatched the envelope off the table, holding it tightly against her chest. She glanced at Chad, a triumphant smirk replacing her previous tantrum. She genuinely believed she had won. She assumed the envelope contained a cashier's check, a desperate financial offering to buy back my parents' approval. Gregory straightened his posture, adjusting his tie with a look of profound satisfaction. He believed his threat of disownment had broken my resolve. "See? Was that so difficult?" Gregory scoffed. "You finally learned how to be a supportive sister. We will see you tomorrow afternoon, Chloe. Try not to look too miserable." Brenda offered a stiff nod, turning on her heel. Harper and Chad followed her lead, marching out of the private dining room with their heads held high. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, sealing them out of my sanctuary. The jazz trio slowly resumed their playing. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a collective exhale from my invited guests. Julian reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Zoe picked up her phone, tapping the screen to check the time. She looked at me, a dangerous smile spreading across her face. "Do you think she will actually wait until morning to open it?" Zoe asked, her tone laced with dark amusement. "It does not matter if she opens it tonight or tomorrow," I replied, picking up my wine glass for another sip. "The outcome is identical." Harper walked out of that restaurant clutching her own destruction. The envelope did not contain a monetary gift. It did not contain an apology letter or a heartfelt card. It contained an official court-stamped asset seizure notice. Zoe had drafted it earlier that afternoon, detailing the immediate federal hold placed on all accounts linked to Chad's cryptocurrency fund. It listed the specific routing numbers, the defrauded investor names, and the exact dollar amounts he had illegally funneled into his personal trust. Harper went back to her luxury hotel suite, believing she held a financial prize. She was sleeping with a loaded legal weapon on her nightstand. She was dreaming of a spectacular entrance into high society, completely unaware of the ticking clock attached to her chosen venue. The rehearsal dinner concluded in perfect peace. Julian and I returned to our home, leaving our phones on the kitchen counter. We did not need to monitor the situation anymore. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the structural integrity of her stolen kingdom was about to face an unprecedented pressure test. Midnight was fast approaching, and the ancient plumbing system beneath the Westchester estate was about to receive a visit from the city inspectors. Harper's perfect wedding day was mere hours away from being washed down the drain. The digital clock on my bedside table flipped to 11:30. The city outside was quiet, blanketed in the stillness that precedes a major storm. Miles away in the affluent hills of Westchester, the sprawling historic estate Chad had rented was experiencing a very different kind of atmosphere. The property was empty of guests, but it was far from silent. My real estate acquisition firm had mandated a strict compliance review of the property immediately upon purchase. That review mandated the execution of long-delayed municipal safety inspections. I knew the building's infrastructure was compromised. I had read the buried engineering reports detailing the severe corrosion of the primary cast iron water mains. The previous management had bribed local officials for years to ignore the failing systems, funneling their maintenance budget into cosmetic upgrades to attract high-end clientele like my sister. Tonight, the bribes stopped. The city inspectors arrived at the estate precisely at 11:15, armed with high-pressure diagnostic equipment to test the integrity of the archaic plumbing. They connected their gauges to the main valve located beneath the grand ballroom. I received the operational update from my lead property manager via a secure encrypted text message. He was standing on site alongside the municipal crew. He described the process with clinical detachment. The city engineers initiated the stress protocol, pushing water through the aging pipes at modern regulatory pressure levels. The structural failure was not gradual. It was instantaneous and catastrophic. The text messages from my manager arrived in rapid succession. At 11:32, the primary municipal line running directly beneath the foundation of the grand ballroom ruptured. The ancient cast iron shattered under the immense pressure. A massive geyser of dark, untreated water and accumulated sediment blasted upward through the historic hardwood floors. The sheer force of the blowout shattered the imported marble tiles near the catering entrance. The estate's automated emergency systems registered the catastrophic drop in water pressure and the sudden flooding. The fire alarms engaged automatically. A deafening mechanical shriek echoed through the empty halls of the mansion, accompanied by blinding strobe lights. Thousands of gallons of highly pressurized, foul-smelling sludge poured into the meticulously decorated grand ballroom. The venue staff, who had spent the entire afternoon arranging imported white orchids and setting up crystal dining tables for Harper's elite guests, watched in absolute horror as a tidal wave of brown water decimated their work. The muddy deluge swept away the expensive floral arrangements, soaked the custom velvet drapery, and transformed the pristine dance floor into a hazardous swamp. The municipal inspectors did not hesitate. The building was immediately classified as a severe structural and biohazardous liability. Under state law, a commercial property experiencing a primary sanitary failure of that magnitude cannot remain operational. The lead city engineer slapped a bright red condemnation notice directly across the heavy oak front doors of the estate. The building was officially shut down, legally barred from hosting any public or private gatherings indefinitely. The venue was dead. I set my phone face down on the nightstand. The first domino had officially fallen, and the impact was about to hit the luxury hotel suite where my sister was currently sleeping. At 12:15 in the morning, the estate's panicked operations manager dialed Chad's mobile phone. Chad was staying in a separate penthouse suite at a high-end boutique hotel downtown, projecting the image of an unflappable tech titan. The manager did not sugarcoat the situation. He informed Chad that the venue was entirely destroyed, citing a massive infrastructure collapse. He explicitly stated that the municipal government had condemned the property and the wedding was forcibly canceled. When Chad demanded an immediate refund of his exorbitant cash deposit to secure an alternate location, the manager delivered the secondary blow. Under the terms of the commercial lease agreement, sudden catastrophic structural failures triggered an automatic financial freeze pending insurance investigations. The deposit was locked in escrow. Chad had just lost his venue and hundreds of thousands of stolen investor dollars in a single phone call. Chad's initial reaction was denial. He hung up the phone and frantically dialed Harper. Harper was in her bridal suite wearing a silk robe and relaxing with a 24-karat gold face mask applied by a private esthetician. She was reviewing her social media metrics, calculating how much engagement her tearful victim video had generated. When her phone rang displaying Chad's name, she answered with an annoyed sigh, assuming he was calling to complain about a minor logistical detail. The audio from that phone call would become legend among the hotel staff working the night shift. Harper's shrill, panicked scream pierced through the heavy, soundproof doors of her luxury suite. The esthetician dropped her expensive serums and backed away as my sister sprang from the plush sofa. The gold mask cracked and peeled off her face, mirroring the sudden destruction of her fabricated reality. Chad relayed the catastrophic news. The venue was gone. The money was frozen. The event of the decade was canceled. Harper hurled her smartphone across the room. It struck a heavy brass floor lamp, the glass screen shattering instantly. She began tearing through the suite like a feral animal trapped in a cage. She swept her arm across the vanity, knocking hundreds of dollars worth of premium cosmetics onto the carpet. She screamed at the terrified esthetician to get out, hurling a throw pillow at the retreating woman. The carefully curated image of the poised, elegant bride evaporated. Harper paced the length of the room, her breath coming in ragged, hysterical gasps. She had invited the most powerful venture capitalists on the eastern seaboard to this wedding. She had mocked my modest venue choice and publicly declared her superiority. She had promised her wealthy guests an unparalleled display of opulence. Now, less than 12 hours before the ceremony, she had nowhere for them to go. She grabbed the hotel phone and dialed our parents' room down the hall. Gregory and Brenda rushed into the bridal suite wearing their pajamas, expecting a minor pre-wedding jitter. They found their golden child sobbing violently on the floor amidst broken glass and spilled makeup. When Harper choked out the reality of the flooded estate, the blood drained entirely from Gregory's face. He stumbled backward, gripping the doorframe for support. His mind raced, calculating the profound social humiliation. He had spent weeks bragging to his country club associates about his future son-in-law's limitless wealth and the historic estate they had secured. The prospect of calling those elite contacts on the morning of the wedding to admit they were standing in a literal swamp was an unbearable blow to his ego. Brenda immediately shifted into denial mode. She demanded Gregory call the mayor, call the city planners, call anyone with political leverage to force the inspectors to remove the red tag. She believed their social status granted them immunity from municipal safety codes. Gregory pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, but deep down, he knew no amount of political influence could instantly repair a shattered cast-iron water main and drain thousands of gallons of toxic sludge from a ballroom. They were trapped. Chad arrived at the bridal suite an hour later, looking disheveled and frantic. The polished cryptocurrency billionaire facade was cracking under the intense pressure. He knew the venue failure was a logistical nightmare for Harper, but for him, it represented a lethal threat. If the wedding did not happen, if the high-net-worth investors arrived to find empty promises instead of a lavish gala, they would start asking questions. They would demand to see the financial ledgers. They would want their money back. The Ponzi scheme required constant forward momentum and the illusion of massive success to survive. A canceled event would trigger an immediate run on the fund, exposing the empty accounts. He could not let the guests go home. He needed them in a room. He needed a stage to deliver his pitch before the illusion collapsed entirely. In the chaotic, desperate hours before dawn, Chad made a fatal, arrogant calculation. He refused to admit defeat. He believed his vast, albeit stolen, financial resources could easily solve a logistical hurdle. He decided he would simply buy his way out of the crisis. He would find another venue regardless of the cost and seamlessly redirect the guest list. He pulled out his laptop and began searching for every premier event space within a 50-mile radius capable of accommodating 300 VIP guests on a Saturday morning with zero notice. He intended to walk in, drop a briefcase of cash on the manager's desk, and commandeer their facility. He was completely blind to the fact that high-end venues are booked years in advance, and his desperate strategy was pushing him directly toward the only remaining open door in the city. A door I was personally holding open for him. 6 o'clock in the morning, October 12. The sky over the city was a bruised, unforgiving gray. Inside the bridal suite, the atmosphere had degraded from frantic panic into toxic, volatile desperation. Harper sat rigidly on the edge of the bed, her eyes red and swollen, furiously refreshing the weather app on her phone, as if a sunny forecast could somehow unflood her condemned venue. Gregory paced the carpet, barking empty threats into his cell phone, attempting to reach city councilmen who were pointedly ignoring his calls at dawn on a Saturday. Chad stood near the window, his laptop balanced precariously on a luggage rack. His meticulously styled hair was disheveled. The polished veneer of the cryptocurrency genius was cracking under the immense gravitational pull of his impending financial ruin. He was staring at a flight tracking application. The little green icons moving across the digital map represented incoming private jets and first-class commercial flights carrying the exact people he intended to defraud. High-net-worth individuals do not tolerate severe logistical incompetence. If they landed and received a cancellation email citing plumbing issues, their skepticism would ignite. Venture capitalists are trained to smell blood in the water. They would question the operational stability of a tech founder who could not even secure a functional wedding venue. The whispering would start. The due diligence requests would follow. By Monday morning, his investors would demand to see the escrow accounts, and the entire Ponzi structure would implode. He could not let them ask questions. He needed them awed by opulence. He needed them holding champagne flutes, completely distracted by luxury. Chad slammed his laptop shut. He pulled up his contacts list and began a frantic, brutal dialing campaign. He targeted every country club, private museum, and elite botanical garden within a 50-mile radius. He bypassed standard event coordinators demanding to speak directly to general managers and executive directors. His strategy was crude but aggressive. He offered double the standard rental fees, promising immediate wire transfers for any space capable of holding 300 VIP guests. The responses were uniformly disastrous. It was the peak of the autumn wedding season. Every viable location was fully booked, heavily staffed, and actively preparing for their own contracted events. Venue managers laughed at his demands or hung up the phone in sheer disbelief at his audacity. By 7:30, Chad had exhausted his list. His breathing grew shallow. He loosened his expensive silk tie, staring blankly at the wall. The walls of his fabricated empire were closing in. Harper marched across the room and grabbed his arm. "What are we going to do?" she demanded, her voice shrill and accusatory. "My makeup artist arrives in an hour. My dress is hanging right there. You promised me the event of the century. Fix this, Chad. Fix it now." Chad looked at his fiancé, his mind calculating a wildly reckless, incredibly dangerous pivot. He needed a venue that was already fully staffed, impeccably decorated, and prepared to serve hundreds of guests. He needed a space that met the exacting standards of the financial elite. He remembered the save-the-date card Harper had mockingly pinned to their refrigerator months ago. He knew exactly where the only fully operational premium event space in the city was located. It was the ultra-exclusive luxury hotel where I was currently preparing to walk down the aisle. Chad did not view my wedding as a sacred event. He viewed it as an exploitable resource. In his arrogant sociopathic logic, he convinced himself that a mid-level event planner like me could easily be bullied, bought out, or simply overpowered. He genuinely believed his stolen capital granted him the authority to commandeer my entire reception. "We are not canceling," Chad announced, his voice regaining a fraction of its arrogant swagger. He turned to Harper, gripping her shoulders. "Put on the dress. Have your parents get ready. The wedding is happening today," where Gregory demanded, pausing his pacing. "Every hall in the tri-state area is booked solid. Not Chloe's hall," Chad replied, a cold, predatory smirk forming on his face. "She booked the grand atrium at the St. Regis. It is fully catered. The floral arrangements are already installed. The staff is on site. It is perfectly designed for a high-end crowd." Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You cannot just take your sister's venue. She has her own guests arriving." Chad scoffed, dismissing the moral implications with a wave of his hand. "Chloe invited a handful of middle-class relatives and a few corporate drones. My guest list consists of billionaires and institutional investors. This is a matter of basic economics. We go to the St. Regis. I find the general manager and I offer to purchase the entire event outright. I will pay double whatever Chloe paid them. I will reimburse her guests for their travel and tell them the event is postponed." Harper's eyes widened, the toxic entitlement returning in full force. She loved the idea. The sheer cruelty of hijacking my actual wedding day appealed to her narcissistic core. But how do we get our guests there? They think they are going to Westchester. "I am sending a mass broadcast right now," Chad said, pulling out his phone. "I will tell them the Westchester estate suffered a minor power failure, and we upgraded the venue to the St. Regis to ensure their comfort. They will appreciate the swift executive decision-making. It makes me look decisive." He drafted the message attaching the address of my hotel and hit send. The digital directive blasted out to 300 of the wealthiest individuals on the East Coast, instructing them to converge on my exact location. Chad believed he was executing a brilliant, ruthless corporate maneuver. He thought he was deploying overwhelming financial force to steamroll a weaker opponent. He intended to march into the hotel lobby, flash a bank statement, and casually kick me out of my own wedding dress. He assumed the hotel management would bow to his supposed wealth, void my contract, and hand him the keys to the ballroom. He was incredibly, fatally mistaken. The St. Regis was not managed by easily intimidated local vendors. It was a flagship property within the hospitality portfolio my firm explicitly controlled. The general manager did not report to a regional director. He reported directly to my acquisitions team. Chad and Harper were packing their bags, preparing to launch a hostile takeover. They had no idea they were marching their entire fraudulent operation straight into a heavily fortified bunker. The guests were already in transit. The trap was locked. The predators were eagerly running toward the slaughterhouse. The gilded analog clock in the grand lobby of the St. Regis struck 10. Outside the towering glass revolving doors, the chaotic ballet of high society arrivals commenced. Sleek black town cars, heavily armored sport utility vehicles, and the occasional chauffeur-driven Maybach pulled up to the curb in a relentless, synchronized procession. The valets, accustomed to the demanding pace of elite events, moved with sharp efficiency, opening doors for the disembarking passengers. These were not standard wedding guests holding registry gifts. They were titans of the financial sector. Hedge fund managers from Wall Street, private equity directors, and prominent venture capitalists stepped onto the sidewalk. The men wore tailored, bespoke suits. The women were draped in designer silk and heavy, conspicuous diamonds. They had received Chad's frantic early morning text message and seamlessly redirected their drivers, fully expecting to attend a lavish celebration hosted by a rapidly rising cryptocurrency billionaire. From my secure vantage point in the bridal suite overlooking the entrance through a discreet security monitor, I watched the vanguard of Chad's fraudulent empire infiltrate my venue. The general manager of the hotel, a seasoned professional who reported directly to my asset management division, stood by the monitor, waiting for his instructions. Standard hospitality protocol dictated that uninvited guests, especially a coordinated influx of 300 strangers, be immediately intercepted by security and escorted off the premises to protect the contracted client. I did not want them escorted out. I wanted them comfortably seated. Let them in. I instructed the general manager, my voice calm and deliberate. Direct your staff to treat every single arrival with the utmost deference. Accept their coats, offer them immediate refreshments, and guide them directly into the grand atrium. Do not ask for invitations. Do not verify names. Open the doors wide. The manager nodded sharply, understanding the tactical execution required, and relayed the orders through his earpiece. Down in the lobby, the atmosphere was a masterclass in orchestrated deception. Chad's investors walked through the heavy glass doors and were instantly enveloped in an environment of breathtaking, uncompromising luxury. The St. Regis staff executed my directives flawlessly. White-gloved servers greeted the arrivals with silver trays carrying flutes of vintage champagne. A classical string quartet positioned near the grand staircase played a sophisticated arrangement that echoed perfectly off the polished marble floors. The guests murmured in quiet, approving tones as they checked their coats and moved toward the reception area. The transition from the lobby into the grand atrium elicited audible gasps of genuine awe, even from individuals accustomed to extreme wealth. I had spared no expense in designing the aesthetic of the space. Thousands of imported white orchids cascaded from the vaulted ceiling, creating a suspended floral canopy that defied gravity. Towering crystal centerpieces caught the ambient light, refracting it across tables draped in heavy silver-threaded linens. A massive, perfectly constructed champagne tower stood near the entrance, a shimmering monument to absolute financial stability. The venture capitalists surveyed the room, their experienced eyes rapidly calculating the sheer cost of the production. To rent the grand atrium, import the out-of-season florals, and secure the premium catering staff required a staggering liquid capital expenditure. The visual impact achieved exactly what Chad desperately needed it to achieve. It projected unassailable, limitless prosperity. The investors mingled, sipping their champagne, their conversations buzzing with validated confidence. I watched the security feed as a prominent hedge fund director clinked his glass with a colleague. I could read the satisfaction in their posture. They looked around the opulent room and mentally confirmed that Chad was exactly who he claimed to be. They believed they were standing inside a fortress built by a financial genius. They were thoroughly convinced that the man they were preparing to trust with millions of dollars possessed the liquid assets to back up his aggressive tech fund pitch. The collective ego of the room swelled. The investors felt secure, pampered, and eager to write checks to the man who could orchestrate such a flawless, high-end event on a moment's notice. The illusion of Chad's elite status was pumped to its absolute maximum capacity. Not a single person holding a crystal flute in that magnificent atrium had the slightest inkling of the truth. They did not know that the vintage champagne they were drinking, the orchids hanging above their heads, and the very floor they stood upon were entirely financed by the woman Harper continually mocked as a financial failure. They believed they were guests in Chad's kingdom. They were actually captive audience members inside my personal courtroom. My own invited guests, a smaller, carefully curated group of close friends and trusted colleagues, had been discreetly redirected by the hotel staff to a private mezzanine lounge overlooking. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand atrium did not simply open. They were shoved violently apart, the brass handles slamming against the interior walls with a sharp, resonant crack that instantly silenced the string quartet. The clock above the entryway read exactly 11. The high society chatter died in the throats of the venture capitalists and hedge fund managers. Every eye in the room turned toward the entrance. Harper stood in the threshold, an aggressive vision of stolen wealth. The custom silk gown she wore was heavily encrusted with thousands of imported crystals, the sheer weight of the fabric requiring her to drag the train across the marble floor. Chad flanked her right side, his bespoke tuxedo looking slightly rumpled from their frantic mourning, but his posture radiating an arrogant, combative energy. My parents. Gregory and Brenda formed the rearguard, their faces flushed with the exertion of an unearned victory. They did not walk into the venue like a bridal party preparing for a sacred ceremony. They marched in like a hostile occupying force claiming a conquered territory. 2 hotel security guards stepped forward instinctively to intercept the unverified arrivals. Gregory did not hesitate. He thrust a dismissive hand toward the guards, puffing out his chest with the hollow authority of a man who believed his credit limit dictated reality. "Step aside," Gregory bellowed, his voice echoing harshly through the refined acoustics of the atrium. "We are taking over this reservation. Send the general manager to my table immediately with the final invoice. We are paying the balance in full in cash. Clear the schedule." The guards, having received my explicit instructions through their earpieces, offered no physical resistance. They simply stepped back, their faces impassive, allowing the invading party to pass unimpeded. Harper's eyes scanned the vast, opulent room. She took in the suspended floral canopy, the towering champagne cascade, and the impeccably dressed servers gliding between the tables. More importantly, she saw her guest list. The institutional investors, the tech founders, and the elite socialites she had desperately courted were all present, holding crystal flutes and watching her arrival. A profound, triumphant smile spread across her face. The panic of the flooded Westchester estate evaporated instantly. In her twisted, narcissistic reality, the lack of security resistance and the presence of her guests meant her audacious gamble had worked flawlessly. She genuinely believed she had successfully hijacked my venue, overwhelmed the hotel management with Chad's supposed financial leverage, and erased my wedding from existence. She dropped Chad's arm and strode purposefully toward the center of the room. She bypassed the elegant dining tables, dragging her heavy crystal-laden train across the pristine dance floor. She marched directly toward the raised dais where the master of ceremonies was reviewing his schedule. Harper did not ask for permission. She reached out and snatched the microphone directly from the stunned MC's hand. She turned to face the crowd of 300 elite investors. The stage lights caught the massive diamond on her finger and the glittering stones on her bodice. She stood at the absolute zenith of her fabricated empire, basking in the concentrated attention of the wealthiest individuals on the East Coast. Her eyes darted quickly around the perimeter of the room, searching the shadows and the service doors. She was looking for me. She wanted to see my face crumpled in defeat. She wanted to witness the exact moment the sister she despised realized she had been entirely displaced, relegated to the background, while the golden child stole the spotlight. Finding no immediate sign of me, her victorious smirk widened into a look of sheer, unadulterated contempt. She raised the microphone, tapping it once before speaking. "I want to apologize to everyone for the minor change in venue this morning," Harper announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, amplified through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. "As you all know, Chad and I demand only the highest standards for our guests. When our original location failed to meet those expectations, we knew we had to pivot." She paused, letting a soft, dramatic sigh escape her lips, playing the role of the resilient, high-class bride overcoming adversity. But as you can plainly see, Harper continued, her tone sharpening into a weaponized boast. "True class cannot be stopped by minor inconveniences. There are certain people in this world who are petty people who stubbornly hold on to a date on a calendar simply to tear others down. People who try to force you into the shadows because they cannot stand to see you shine." The investors exchanged confused, quiet glances. The aggressive, highly personal nature of her speech was jarring in a professional networking environment. They expected a toast to the future, not a thinly veiled airing of family grievances. "But I refuse to be diminished," Harper declared, her voice rising in volume, fueled by the intoxicating rush of perceived power. "We belong in a room like this. We belong at the top. So despite the pathetic attempts to sabotage my day, I am standing right here. I am taking what is mine." "Welcome to our wedding, everyone." Gregory and Brenda stood near the front tables, clapping loudly, their faces glowing with immense pride. They nodded vigorously at the wealthy guests around them, entirely validating Harper's toxic narrative. Chad stood near the edge of the stage, adjusting his cuffs, projecting the image of the stoic, incredibly wealthy provider who had just purchased the world for his bride. They were entirely consumed by their own performance. They were so blinded by their arrogance and their desperate need for validation that they failed to notice the subtle, chilling shift occurring along the perimeter of the grand atrium. While Harper delivered her victory speech, the discreet hotel security staff moved with coordinated military precision. The primary mahogany entrance doors were quietly pushed shut. The heavy brass deadbolts clicked into place, the sound masked by the echo of Harper's amplified voice. Across the room, the secondary service exits and emergency evacuation corridors were similarly secured by plainclothes personnel. The perimeter was locked. The exits were sealed. No one inside the grand atrium was leaving without my explicit authorization. Harper was standing on a stage she did not own, boasting to an audience. She was actively defrauding, while the invisible walls of a federal trap closed tightly around her. The spotlight was hers, but the microphone was about to change hands. The applause from my parents died away, leaving an awkward, stagnant silence in the wake of Harper's aggressive speech. The venture capitalists and hedge fund managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were professionals accustomed to calculated boardroom pitches, not the venomous reality television performance they had just witnessed. Harper remained center stage, her chest heaving, the microphone gripped tightly in her hand. She waited for the adulation she felt she was owed. She waited for the room to validate her stolen triumph. Instead, a rhythmic staccato sound cut through the heavy silence of the ballroom. Click, click, click. The sharp, measured impact of stiletto heels striking the polished marble floor echoed from the far side of the room. The sound did not originate from the main entrance where the guests had arrived. It came from the shadowed alcove flanking the secondary staging area. I stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. The room's ambient lighting caught the fabric of my gown. I did not wear thousands of imported crystals. I did not require a heavy, ostentatious train to demand attention. I wore a masterfully tailored pure silk sheath dress, a garment defined by severe architectural lines and unapologetic elegance. I walked with the unhurried, terrifying confidence of a woman who held the deed to the building and the key to the execution chamber. The murmurs in the crowd ceased entirely. 300 heads turned to watch my slow, deliberate approach. Harper froze. The triumphant smirk on her face fractured, replaced instantly by a look of profound, unadulterated panic. She recognized the fabric of my dress. She recognized the flawless, unbothered calm radiating from my posture. Her brain, desperate to maintain the illusion of control, struggled to process why I was not crying in a hallway or arguing frantically with the hotel management. I stopped walking when I was exactly 10 feet from the base of the stage. I did not look at my parents, who were suddenly pale and silent near the front tables. I did not look at Chad, who was shifting his weight, nervously adjusting his cuffs. I locked my eyes directly onto my sister. I did not ask for the microphone. I did not shout or attempt to engage in a petty public screaming match. I simply stood there, a physical manifestation of an impenetrable boundary, and allowed a cold, razor-thin smile to touch the corners of my lips. Harper opened her mouth, her hand tightening around the microphone, preparing to hurl an insult or order security to remove me. But before a single word could escape, her throat movement on the opposite side of the stage commanded the room's attention. Zoe emerged from the secondary access corridor. She did not wear a bridesmaid dress or a subdued evening gown. She wore a sharp crimson power suit, a garment that projected immediate, uncompromising legal authority. She walked with the fierce, purposeful stride of a senior Wall Street litigator, preparing to dismantle a hostile witness. Zoe bypassed Harper entirely. She did not even acknowledge my sister's presence. She marched straight to the audiovisual control station, situated at the rear of the raised platform. The hotel technician, recognizing the intense, predatory focus in her eyes, wisely stepped aside. Zoe withdrew a sleek, encrypted USB drive from her pocket. She inserted it into the master terminal with a definitive metallic click. She did not pause to adjust settings or test the feed. She tapped a single command on the keyboard. The massive 30-foot high-definition LED screen forming the backdrop of the stage instantly flared to life. Harper flinched, startled by the sudden illumination behind her. She expected to see a curated montage of engagement photos or a sprawling, digitized sunset. The 300 elite investors in the room raised their heads, anticipating the launch of Chad's highly touted cryptocurrency pitch deck. The image that populated the massive screen was not a romantic photograph or a financial projection. It was a stark, high-resolution scan of a legal document stamped heavily in stark red ink. The text was large, clear, and impossible to misinterpret. The document was the certified commercial property deed for the very hotel hosting the event. It detailed the recent acquisition of the real estate holding company, and listed clearly under the primary ownership section was the name of the private equity fund I exclusively controlled. The silence in the room grew suffocating. The reality of the document slowly filtered through the minds of the sophisticated investors. They realized instantly that Chad did not command this space. He had not bought out a venue with his vast resources. I was standing on a stage owned entirely by the woman standing calmly on the marble floor. But the property deed was merely the opening salvo. Zoe tapped a second key. The screen split in half. On the right side of the massive display, a highly detailed forensic financial flowchart materialized. This was not a complex, opaque banking document. It was a simplified, ruthlessly clear tracking of specific wire transfers. It traced the origin of incoming investments, displaying the names of several prominent individuals currently sitting at the premier tables in the ballroom. The red arrows on the screen mapped the flow of their capital. The money did not route into a decentralized finance protocol or a blockchain development firm. The arrows routed directly into a private offshore holding account. And from that offshore account, the flowchart displayed the devastating outbound expenditures. The screen flashed high-definition images of digital receipts, a $90,000 transfer to an Antwerp diamond broker, juxtaposed perfectly with a zoomed-in photograph of Harper's engagement ring, a $200,000 wire transfer to the condemned Westchester estate, and finally, a devastatingly clear receipt from a luxury bridal boutique detailing the $85,000 purchase of the exact crystal heavy gown Harper was currently wearing. The investors stared at the screen. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. They were looking at their own money. They were staring at their capital not invested in a revolutionary technology, but draped across the shoulders of a terrified bride and wrapped around her ring finger. Zoe stepped up to the secondary podium. She did not require Harper's microphone. She leaned into the dedicated house audio system. Her voice echoed through the grand atrium, a crisp, lethal baritone that cut through the silence like a scalpel. "Thank you for saving us the trouble of hunting you down," Chad Zoe announced, the audio reverberating off the crystal chandeliers. "Bringing your entire victim pool into a secured room was a massive logistical convenience. The authorities sincerely appreciate your cooperation." Harper dropped the microphone. It hit the stage floor with a sharp, piercing screech of audio feedback, signaling the total collapse of her fabricated reality. The illusion was dead, and the real audience was about to demand a refund. G, the main floor. They watched the influx of strangers with quiet confusion, sipping their drinks while awaiting further instructions. Julian stood among them, calmly answering hushed questions, ensuring our people remained comfortable and insulated from the impending collision. The stage was meticulously set. The seating arrangements were filled with high-value targets. The bait had been swallowed whole. Chad and Harper were currently speeding toward the hotel, armed with their stolen wealth and boundless arrogance, fully intending to hijack my venue by force. They thought they were crashing a vulnerable, unprotected party. They had no idea they were walking directly into a snare built specifically for their destruction. The heavy mahogany doors at the front of the hotel were about to swing open for the final time. The architects of the fraud were arriving, eager to claim their stolen throne. The high-pitched feedback from the dropped microphone faded into a thick, suffocating silence. The ambient hum of the hotel ventilation system suddenly seemed deafening. 300 elite investors, venture capitalists, and hedge fund managers remained frozen in their seats, their eyes darting rapidly between the massive LED screen and the man sweating profusely on the stage. These were not amateur traders. They were hardened financial veterans who spent their lives analyzing risk, evaluating market trends, and sniffing out corporate deception. The forensic flowchart glowing behind Chad was not a vague accusation. It was a precise, mathematically undeniable roadmap of grand larceny. The routing numbers matched their private investment accounts. The dates corresponded exactly with their initial capital injections. The glittering facade of the billionaire cryptocurrency visionary shattered in an instant, exposing the desperate hollow reality underneath. The silence broke with a violent concussive crash. A prominent real estate developer seated in the front row stood up abruptly. He hurled his crystal champagne flute directly onto the polished marble floor. The glass exploded, sending sharp fragments skittering across the aisle. He did not care about hotel decorum. He pointed a rigid, furious finger squarely at Chad's chest. "You used my pension fund to buy a bedazzled dress for your wife." The developer roared, his voice trembling with raw, unadulterated rage. The sound ripped through the ballroom, acting as a catalyst for the collective fury of the defrauded crowd. The room erupted. The polite, sophisticated atmosphere vanished, replaced by the primal chaos of a financial panic. Dozens of investors surged to their feet, shouting demands, pulling out their phones, and frantically dialing their wealth managers to freeze whatever assets they still possessed. The anger was palpable, a toxic cloud of betrayal and humiliation. They had been lured into a lavish trap, plied with vintage wine, and expected to applaud the very man who was actively draining their accounts. Chad staggered backward, his polished loafers slipping slightly on the smooth stage surface. The arrogant posture he had maintained for months crumbled entirely. All the color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. Heavy beads of sweat gathered on his forehead, rolling down his temples to stain the collar of his bespoke tuxedo. He opened his mouth, attempting to formulate a defense, trying to spin a narrative about aggressive investment strategies or temporary liquidity issues. No words materialized. He was staring down a mob of incredibly powerful individuals who held the political and legal leverage to destroy him 100 times over. He was a cornered rat, stripped of his disguises, realizing the maze was finally sealed. Harper, oblivious to the complex financial mechanics displayed on the screen, only understood that her moment of triumph was rapidly dissolving into a public nightmare. She saw the furious investors advancing toward the stage. She saw her fiancé cowering near the backdrop. Her survival instinct, honed by decades of deflecting blame onto others, kicked into overdrive. She lunged forward, scrambling to retrieve the discarded microphone from the floor. She gripped the metal handle tightly, intending to project her voice over the escalating chaos. She planned to unleash a hysterical tirade accusing me of hacking the system, fabricating the documents, and orchestrating an elaborate, jealous smear campaign to ruin her perfect day. Harper raised the microphone to her lips, drawing a deep breath to fuel her manufactured outrage. She screamed my name, expecting the sound to boom through the hotel's surround sound speakers and silence the angry crowd. Nothing happened. Her voice was entirely swallowed by the ambient noise of the shouting investors. She tapped the microphone, frantically blowing into the metal mesh. Dead silence. From the audio-visual control booth at the rear of the stage, Zoe watched Harper's frantic, impotent struggle. Zoe did not flinch. She simply leaned forward and tapped a single key on the master mixing console. She had severed the power to Harper's microphone the exact second she dropped it. The digital cutoff was absolute. Harper stared at the dead piece of equipment in her hand, her chest heaving with frustrated, panicked breaths. The realization struck her with paralyzing force. She had spent 30 years controlling the narrative within our family. She had manipulated my parents, weaponized her victimhood, and twisted every situation to ensure she remained the center of attention. She was accustomed to screaming until people capitulated just to restore the peace. But screaming requires an audience, and an audience requires a platform. I stood calmly on the marble floor, observing the catastrophic failure of her reality. I had systematically purchased the building, secured the audio equipment, and locked the doors. I had stripped away every single mechanism she used to project her false superiority. She was standing on a silent stage wearing a stolen dress, entirely powerless to stop the truth from consuming her. The wealthy investors ignored her frantic pantomiming. They were focused entirely on Chad, demanding answers about their missing millions. Harper turned toward her fiancé, her eyes wide with desperate expectation. She waited for him to step forward to deploy his supposed wealth and influence, to silence the angry crowd, to protect her from the sudden, overwhelming humiliation. Chad did not step forward. He avoided her gaze entirely, his eyes darting frantically toward the service doors at the back of the platform, calculating his escape route. He was not a billionaire savior. He was a terrified fraudster, calculating how fast he could run. Seeing her golden ticket crumbling under pressure, Harper turned her frantic, searching eyes toward the only remaining source of validation she had left. She looked down at the front row, searching for the two people who had always shielded her from the consequences of her own actions. She looked for our parents, expecting them to rush the stage, defend her honor, and demand that the hotel management intervene. She expected them to save her, completely unaware that the financial devastation displayed on the massive LED screen was about to hit much closer to home. The impending collision was not just going to destroy Chad's fake empire. It was about to eradicate our parents' entire future. The uproar in the grand atrium escalated as furious investors continued to hurl accusations at the stage. Seeing their golden child paralyzed and surrounded by hostility, my parents' deeply ingrained instinct to protect their own delusion kicked into overdrive. Gregory and Brenda shoved their way past the shouting venture capitalists, marching up the short flight of stairs to the raised platform. They positioned themselves physically in front of Harper, creating a human barrier against the angry crowd. Gregory's face was flushed a dangerous mottled crimson. The veins in his neck pulsed visibly against the starched collar of his expensive tuxedo. He did not direct his fury at the man sweating profusely behind him. He targeted the only person he felt comfortable bullying. He locked his eyes onto me. "You are a venomous snake, Chloe." Gregory bellowed, his voice straining to be heard over the chaotic din of the ballroom. His finger trembled as he pointed it squarely at my face. "You fabricated this entire spectacle just to ruin your sister's big day. You are sick with jealousy." Brenda stood beside him, clutching her designer evening bag tightly to her chest. She glared at me, her expression a mix of maternal disappointment and profound disgust. "We warned you," Brenda added, her voice shrill and trembling with manufactured outrage. "We told you to stay away, but you had to push it. You had to embarrass us in front of these important people." Gregory took a step closer to the edge of the stage, attempting to project the dominant patriarchal authority he believed he possessed. He thought intimidation could rewrite reality. "I will destroy you for this." Gregory threatened, his volume rising. "I will hire the most ruthless legal team in the state. I will use every single asset I own. I will drain my entire retirement fund to sue you into oblivion for defamation and slander. You will spend the rest of your miserable life paying for what you did to your brother-in-law's reputation today." I stood motionless on the marble floor. I did not flinch at his threats. I did not feel the familiar, suffocating weight of parental rejection that used to paralyze me. I looked at the man who had spent my entire life minimizing my achievements and funding my sister's narcissism. He was confidently threatening to annihilate me, using financial leverage he no longer possessed. A short, bitter laugh escaped my lips. It was a cold sound that cut through the surrounding noise, sharp enough to make a few nearby investors turn their heads. I raised my hand, catching Zoe's attention in the audiovisual booth. I gave her a single, definitive nod. Zoe tapped the keyboard. The massive LED screen behind my parents shifted instantly. The forensic flowchart detailing the offshore wire transfers vanished. In its place, a high-resolution scan of a multi-page legal document populated the 30-foot display. I stepped closer to the stage, ensuring my voice carried clearly to the people standing on the platform. "You do not have any assets left to sue me with, Dad," I stated, my tone even and clinical. Gregory frowned, his aggressive posture faltering slightly as confusion clouded his face. He glanced over his shoulder at the glowing screen. The document displayed was a commercial loan origination form. The bold text at the top clearly identified a prominent regional lending institution. Chad did not just defraud the venture capitalists in this room. I continued, my voice amplifying through the silence that was slowly rippling across the front rows of the audience. He defrauded his own investors, and he defrauded you. I gestured toward the screen. The image zoomed in, highlighting specific data fields on the second page of the document. "He convinced you to sign a secondary mortgage agreement," I explained, watching the color begin to drain from my father's flushed face. "He told you it was a guaranteed high-yield investment opportunity. He persuaded you to leverage the entire equity of your primary residence, the house you have lived in for 30 years. Brenda turned around, her eyes widening as she recognized the address of her own home printed in stark black ink on the 30-foot screen. But he did not stop at the house, I added, delivering the final devastating facts. He convinced you to liquidate your entire retirement portfolio. And last week, when you froze my grandmother's trust fund to pay for Harper's dress, you handed the remaining balance of that account directly to him as well. The screen shifted again, zooming in on the final signature page of the loan agreement. The digital scan clearly showed two distinct verified signatures at the bottom of the document: Gregory and Brenda. My mother stared at her own signature projected massively on the wall. The reality of her actions hit her with the crushing force of a physical blow. The money was not sitting in a secure, high-yield cryptocurrency fund. The money had been used to buy the very dress Harper was wearing, the flowers that were currently rotting in the flooded Westchester estate, and the offshore accounts Chad had prepared for his escape. Brenda's knees buckled. Her expensive evening gown crumpled around her as she collapsed heavily onto the hard stage floor. She did not scream or cry. The profound, inescapable shock rendered her entirely mute. She sat in a heap, her hands resting limply in her lap, staring blankly at the floorboards. The wealthy, judgmental matriarch, who had spent the morning bragging to her friends about her elite new family connections, was instantly reduced to absolute destitution. Gregory stood paralyzed beside his collapsed wife. He clutched his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic as the sheer magnitude of his financial ruin suffocated him. He had blindly trusted a con artist because Chad offered the illusion of unearned status. He had eagerly sacrificed his independent, hardworking daughter to appease a parasite. Now he was staring at a future devoid of his home, his savings, and his retirement. He slowly turned his head to look at Chad. The golden son-in-law was shrinking back against the velvet curtains, trying to avoid the furious glare of the man whose life he had just systematically destroyed. The people who had willingly thrown me away for the promise of easy money were now officially penniless, entirely drained by the very child they had worshipped. The psychological execution was complete, but the legal consequences were only just arriving at the front door. Chad surveyed the grand ballroom with the frantic, darting eyes of a cornered predator. The veneer of the elite cryptocurrency pioneer had evaporated, leaving behind a sweating, desperate man, realizing his empire of lies had reached its terminal endpoint. The front rows of the audience were an impenetrable wall of furious investors. Wealthy venture capitalists and hedge fund managers stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces hardened into expressions of lethal intent. They blocked the main mahogany doors, murmuring into their cell phones, already mobilizing their respective legal teams to hunt down his hidden accounts. He glanced down at the stage. Gregory and Brenda remained crumpled on the floor, paralyzed by the sudden evaporation of their life savings and their home. They offered no protection. They were useless to him now. Chad took a slow, calculated step backward. His polished leather loafers slipped slightly on the smooth floorboards. He kept his hands raised in a placating gesture, offering weak, breathless apologies to the crowd, but his body was angling toward the heavy velvet curtains, masking the rear of the platform. Behind those curtains lay the secondary catering corridor, leading directly to the hotel's rear loading dock. He knew he had a solitary window of opportunity. He kept a secondary passport and a secure hardware wallet containing a fraction of the unlaundered cryptocurrency locked in the trunk of his rental car. If he could just slip through the service exit, navigate the back alleys, and reach the regional airport, he could charter a flight to a jurisdiction outside American extradition treaties before the local authorities even processed the initial fraud reports. He took another step back, the heavy fabric of the curtain brushing against his shoulder. Harper was still sobbing near the podium, distracted by the overwhelming public humiliation. She did not notice him retreating. He turned his back on his ruined bride, abandoning her to face the wrath of the defrauded crowd alone. He reached out and wrapped his fingers around the brass handle of the service door. He pressed the latch, down his lungs burning as he prepared to sprint. The door did not yield. Before Chad could push his weight against the wood, a concussive, overwhelming force blasted the heavy door inward. The sudden impact caught him squarely in the chest, knocking him backward. He stumbled, his arms flailing, and crashed hard onto the stage floor, his bespoke tuxedo tearing at the shoulder seam. The quiet hum of the hotel was instantly shattered by the thunderous, rhythmic impact of heavy tactical boots hitting the marble floor. A flood of personnel poured through the rear service corridor and swarmed the stage. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency that instantly commanded the vast room. They did not wear evening gowns or tailored suits. They wore dark navy windbreakers. Emblazoned across their backs and chests in stark high-visibility yellow lettering were the acronyms of Ultimate Federal Authority: FBI, IRS-CI. Dozens of federal agents fanned out across the raised platform and spilled down into the main dining area, establishing an airtight perimeter in a matter of seconds. Silver badges gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. Duty belts holding secured firearms and tactical radios added a heavy metallic clatter to the sudden chaos. The elite investors in the crowd recognized the distinct, uncompromising nature of a federal raid. The angry shouting ceased. The venture capitalists immediately stepped back, clearing a wide, unobstructed path, allowing the government to execute its mandate without interference. Zoe emerged from the shadowed audiovisual booth, walking at a measured, unhurried pace. She descended the short staircase and stopped right beside the lead special agent in charge. The raid was not a spontaneous reaction to my presentation. It was the culmination of a meticulously orchestrated legal strike. 48 hours ago, Zoe had securely transmitted the entire forensic audit, the routing numbers and the encrypted offshore ledger data, directly to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. We had simply provided the federal task force with the exact time and location to collect their target. The lead agent, a tall man with a stern, weathered face, stepped over the ruined floral arrangements scattered across the stage. He loomed over Chad, who was scrambling frantically on his hands and knees, trying to push himself away from the encroaching boots. Chadwick Vance, the agent, barked his voice, carrying the undeniable weight of the United States government. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of interstate wire fraud, securities fraud, and international money laundering." Chad gasped for air, his chest heaving. He raised his trembling hands, attempting to formulate a cohesive sentence, trying to spin one final desperate lie. He opened his mouth to claim a misunderstanding, to blame a rogue accountant, or to cite a temporary liquidity crisis. The agent did not give him the opportunity to speak. Two subordinate officers lunged forward. They grabbed Chad by the arms, hauling his dead weight off the floor with practiced, unrelenting force. They spun him around, pinning his arms sharply behind his back. The sharp, metallic rasp of steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists echoed through the silent ballroom. The sound was distinct, chilling, and permanent. The arrogant cryptocurrency pioneer, the man who had bribed vendors and stolen retirement funds to project an illusion of supreme power, was reduced to a weeping, shivering criminal locked in iron. Harper, jolted from her paralyzing shock by the sight of her fiancé in handcuffs, snapped into a state of pure, unhinged delusion. Her brain, conditioned by decades of facing zero consequences, simply refused to accept the reality of federal law enforcement. She still believed her status, her designer gown, and her loud voice granted her immunity. She let out a piercing, hysterical shriek and charged across the stage. The heavy crystal embellishments on her dress clattered loudly as she sprinted toward the arresting officers. "Get your hands off him!" Harper screamed, her face contorted in an ugly mask of entitlement. "You cannot do this. Do you know who we are? We are hosting a private event. You are ruining my wedding. I will sue every single one of you for harassment." She raised her hands, attempting to physically shove the federal agent away from Chad. It was a spectacular display of profound ignorance. A female agent intercepted her charge effortlessly. The officer stepped into Harper's path, raising a firm, unyielding forearm that halted my sister's momentum instantly. Harper stumbled backward, gasping in outrage at being physically blocked. Step back immediately, the officer warned, her tone devoid of any patience. "Interfere with a federal arrest, and you will be placed in custody for obstruction of justice." Harper ignored the warning. She stomped her designer heel, pointing a shaking finger at the officer. "You cannot touch him. He is a billionaire. My dress alone costs more than your entire salary. We are the victims here." My sister framed us. The mention of the dress triggered a response from a separate division of the raiding party. A woman wearing the distinct windbreaker of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division detached herself from the perimeter. She walked up the stage steps, holding a thick clipboard carrying official court-stamped documentation. The IRS investigator stopped directly in front of Harper. She looked my sister up and down, her gaze sweeping over the opulent gown, the sparkling diamond necklace resting against Harper's collarbone, and the heavy glittering earrings framing her face. The agent did not offer a sympathetic smile. She offered a cold, bureaucratic reality check. Harper Vance, the investigator, stated, checking the name against her printed ledger. We have executed an emergency civil asset forfeiture warrant signed by a federal judge this morning. Harper blinked, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. What are you talking about? I am the bride. I have nothing to do with his business. You are currently wearing the proceeds of a financial crime. The agent clarified, her voice projecting crisp authority over the stunned crowd. Our forensic audit confirms that the $90,000 wire transfer sent to the Antwerp diamond broker last month was drawn directly from defrauded investor capital. The same illicit funding source was used to purchase the custom bridal gown and the designer accessories you are currently wearing. Harper's jaw dropped. She brought her hands up to her throat, instinctively covering the heavy diamond necklace as if she could hide it from the federal government. Those items are classified as stolen assets. The investigator continued, extending an empty, heavy-duty plastic evidence bag. Remove the necklace and the earrings immediately. No. Harper gasped, tears of genuine terror finally spilling over her eyelashes, ruining her meticulous makeup. You cannot take my jewelry. It was a gift. It is my wedding day. Please, you cannot strip me in front of these people. The agent remained entirely unmoved by the theatrical sobbing. The federal government does not recognize gifts purchased with stolen pension funds, ma'am. Remove the jewelry, or my officers will physically remove it for you. The threat of being wrestled to the ground by federal agents finally pierced through Harper's dense layer of narcissism. Her hands shook violently as she reached behind her neck. Her perfectly manicured fingers fumbled with the intricate platinum clasp of the diamond necklace. It took her 3 agonizing attempts to undo the lock. She pulled the heavy, glittering stones away from her skin. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, mourning the loss of her unearned wealth before dropping the necklace into the gaping plastic evidence bag. The diamonds hit the bottom of the bag with a dull, heavy thud. Now the earrings, the agent demanded, holding the bag higher. Harper let out a raw, broken sob. She reached up to her earlobes, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. She unhooked the diamond drops, tears streaming down her face, and surrendered them to the federal investigator. The agent sealed the evidence bag with a sharp, decisive zip, marking the exact moment my sister's artificial empire was permanently dismantled. The golden child who had spent 30 years demanding the spotlight and mocking my independence was left standing on a stage in a heavy, cumbersome gown she did not own, stripped of her stolen diamonds, her neck and ears laid bare for the entire room to see. She collapsed to her knees on the marble floor, burying her face in her hands, weeping with a pathetic, hollow desperation. She watched through her fingers as the federal agents hauled Chad away. The counterfeit billionaire was marched down the center aisle of the ballroom, his head bowed in profound disgrace, paraded past the very investors he had plotted to defraud. The heavy mahogany doors at the entrance swung open to allow the tactical team to exit with their prisoner. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal transport vehicles waiting on the street cast a harsh, chaotic glare into the elegant hotel lobby. The execution was flawless. The parasites had been surgically removed from the venue. The stage was finally clear. I looked out over the hushed crowd of remaining guests, feeling a surge of profound, unshakable peace. The toxic noise of my past had been silenced, leaving room for the true celebration to begin. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, sealing the chaotic, flashing lights of the federal transport vehicles outside. Inside the grand atrium, the stifling tension evaporated, replaced by an atmosphere of crisp, unburdened clarity. My private security detail moved swiftly, organizing a seamless exit for the remaining toxic elements of my family. They escorted my weeping parents and my hysterical sister through a side service corridor. There was no physical struggle required. The sheer crushing reality of their sudden poverty and public disgrace had drained the fight from their bones. They walked out of the venue looking like hollow, discarded stage props. The vast ballroom belonged entirely to us. The hundreds of elite investors, venture capitalists, and hedge fund managers remained standing near their assigned tables. The initial shock of the federal raid settled into a profound, calculated realization. They looked at the blank LED screen on the stage, then turned their collective gaze toward me and Zoe. A senior managing partner from a prominent Wall Street firm stepped into the center aisle. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket, offering a slow, deliberate nod of deep professional respect. He did not need a microphone to voice his gratitude. His silent gesture acknowledged a brutal corporate truth. We had just shielded their portfolios from a catastrophic financial bleed. We intercepted a fraudulent scheme that would have cost their respective firms tens of millions in unrecoverable capital. The quiet reverence radiating from the crowd replaced the artificial, desperate hype Chad had tried to purchase. They took their seats, transitioning seamlessly from hostile intruders to willing, grateful witnesses of a genuine union. The master of ceremonies caught my eye. I offered a slight nod. The string quartet, having recovered their composure, raised their wooden bows. A soft, elegant melody filled the vast, opulent space, washing away the lingering hostility left by my sister's manufactured drama. Julian stepped out from the side corridor. He wore a sharp, midnight blue tuxedo, his posture radiating a quiet, unyielding strength. He walked to the center of the floral archway, his dark eyes locking onto mine. He did not look at the empty chairs in the back row. He only looked at me. I walked down the pristine white aisle runner. I did not need a father to give me away. I did not require the validation of parents who viewed my independence as a threat. I belonged solely to myself, and I was choosing to share my future with the man standing at the altar. My steps were steady, the silk of my gown gliding smoothly over the polished marble floor. I took Julian's hands. The officiant, a retired federal judge and a close friend of Julian's family, stepped forward. The words spoken under the cascading white orchids carried a profound, undeniable weight. We promised loyalty, not blind obedience. We promised equal partnership, not parasitic dependency. I looked out at the assembled guests. Julian's parents smiled warmly from the front row. Zoe stood beside me, projecting fierce, unwavering protection. This was my chosen circle. The toxic blood ties had been surgically removed, leaving only the individuals who valued intellect, integrity, and mutual respect. We exchanged our platinum bands. The applause that followed our first kiss was not polite, obligatory clapping. It was a genuine, thunderous roar of approval from a room full of titans who recognized true, formidable power. The federal justice system moves with a grinding, mechanical efficiency. 6 months after the hotel raid, I sat in my Manhattan corner office reviewing the final court dockets displayed on my monitor. The aftermath of their arrogance was a masterclass in swift, merciless retribution. Chad did not possess the hidden offshore funds to hire a prominent defense attorney. The government had frozen every single account tied to his name. A weary public defender stood beside him as a federal judge handed down a 15-year sentence in a maximum security penitentiary for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. The federal system offers no early parole. He traded his custom-tailored suits for standard-issue uniforms, confined to a concrete cell where his persuasive pitches meant nothing. The financial fallout for Gregory and Brenda was swift and unrelenting. Chad had convinced them to leverage their primary residence to the hilt. When the Ponzi scheme collapsed and the illicit capital vanished, the bank foreclosed on their historic property within 90 days. Their elite country club formally revoked their membership, citing a zero-tolerance policy for financial scandals. Their wealthy friends, terrified of being associated with a federal investigation, blocked their phone numbers. My parents filed for total bankruptcy. They currently reside in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying suburban complex. The sprawling gardens and crystal chandeliers of their past are distant memories. They rely on modest Social Security checks to purchase basic groceries. They have no golden child to boast about, and they have no successful daughter left to manipulate. Harper experienced the steepest, most agonizing drop from grace. Stripped of her stolen diamonds, her designer gowns, and the fake cryptocurrency empire she used to torment me, she faced a mountain of personal debt. The federal government seized her luxury vehicle and her remaining bank accounts to pay court-ordered restitution to the defrauded investors. To satisfy her ongoing legal obligations and basic living expenses, she secured the only employment her limited skill set could manage. The woman who hijacked my wedding date to prove her elite status now works 40 hours a week as a cashier at a local discount supermarket. She scans barcodes and bags groceries wearing a stiff polyester uniform, enduring the grueling, exhausting reality of the working class she once openly despised. Her feet ache at the end of every shift, a daily physical reminder of her spectacular failure. The ultimate irony lay in the corporate aftermath of their ruin. When the federal government auctioned off the commercial properties and physical assets, Chad had illegally acquired my private equity fund stepped into the arena. We purchased the seized commercial real estate at a steep government discount. We integrated the distressed properties into our hospitality portfolio, restructured the debt, and flipped them for a substantial profit. By orchestrating their downfall and neutralizing their fraud, my fund doubled its total valuation. I turned their malicious theft into a 9-figure corporate expansion. The quiet peace I feel standing in my corner office, looking out over the city skyline, is the ultimate retribution. They wanted to shrink my world, to elevate their own fragile egos. They forced me to build an impenetrable fortress instead. Success unbothered and untouchable is the sharpest blade you can wield against those who tried to bury you. You do not need to scream cry or beg for respect. You simply gather the evidence, secure your perimeter, and let their own boundless arrogance pull the trigger. Have you ever had to use cold, hard logic and the law to cut a toxic tumor out of your family tree? Have you ever watched a manipulative relative dig their own grave while you patiently held the shovel? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found satisfaction in this journey of ultimate corporate justice, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of people taking their power back. Never let anyone convince you to dim your light just because it exposes their shadows.